G'day and welcome to Garden Angels. Now you only have to look around gardens at this time of year to see that spring has well and truly sprung. So this week I'm chucking Linda out of the veggie patch. I'm going to get stuck into some planting and give you a good update.
Well, while you're in the veggie patch, I'm transforming a blank wall into an absolute masterpiece using living plants.
Ooh, exciting. And I'm going to be telling everyone how to light up their life and perhaps even show them how to light up their gardens. You're watching Garden Angels.
You don't have to try so hard, just let it happen to you. I'll make it easy for you.
Cymbidium orchids are such exotic looking plants, but because they are so striking, a lot of people think they're difficult to grow. So I'm about to dispel that myth with some insider secrets.
I feel the sunshine on my face. Come rain or shine, it is the same.
Now, if you're not getting flowers like this at your place, then there's a few things that you can be doing. One is to move your plants into an area where they get a little bit more light. Now, it might sound simple, but it can actually encourage these plants to flower. So they like an area that's bright, airy and warm, and out of direct hot sun, frost and strong winds. Now, when it comes to feeding, there's two approaches, I suppose. One is for the gardener who doesn't have a lot of time. That's where you start to get out the controlled release fertiliser, sprinkle it around your plants in the springtime, and then supplementary feed with a couple of boosts of liquid fertiliser. But if you're dead keen, you can actually be liquid feeding every week during the growing season, which is from about May to September. But when it comes to watering, these plants can cope pretty well with drying out, but you'll often find that if they go through long periods of being dry, then they'll actually not flower very well the following couple of years. Now, as a good general rule, you can be watering about once a week during the cooler months and maybe twice a week during the warmer months. But always make sure you stick your finger in the top of the soil. If it's still moist, then you can probably wait a bit. Now this is a classic case of a neglected Cymbidium orchid. And when they're bulging out of the pot like this, it's a clear sign that these plants need to be repotted. The time to do it is after flowering. Now a plant of this size, you would divide into 3 decent sized plants. So I'll just get in here and divide it. I've actually had a bit of a hack at this already with a kitchen knife. One with a serrated edge is really good if you're having trouble just breaking it apart. Just make sure that you remove any of those dead or diseased roots. Now remember, Cymbidium orchids grow as epiphytes in the wild. So they're growing in the crevices of trees or in between rocks. So they've got their roots in leaf litter. They're used to having lots of air around them. So make sure you use a really good coarse orchid mix like this. But here's an insider tip for you. Mix through your potting mix some dolomite. Now this is a granular dolomite. What it does is it helps to keep the pH of the soil a little bit higher and also adds a little dose of calcium to the mix, which your Cymbidium orchids tend to like. So just mix it through and then you can start repotting your 3 new plants. Now just a further tip for you, I wouldn't bother fertilising for at least a month or so after repotting your Cymbidiums because they like to just re-establish their roots a little bit.
They can take it away. I see the sunshine on your face. And it's bright.
So there you go, now you should be armed with all of the knowledge you need to get a flowering orchid display as good as this one.
And it's bright.
Lighting is so important in any garden. It can help to create mood, highlight a feature tree or a plant, and even show you where to go in the dark. A garden like this, of course, is spectacular during the day, but at night it comes alive. This is a great example of lighting up feature trees, Architectural features, showing you the way along stepping stones and pathways, and creating a beautiful mood throughout the entire garden. So here's a few basic lighting components to get you started. Now, if you're really scared of wires or even connecting things, why not start simply with a solar light? There's many different types. As you can see, there's even the larger bollard lights. Some run off a simple battery which stores the energy, obviously, but the sun does most of the work. These are quite dim. I mean, they will actually show you where a pathway is, but very dimly. It's more atmospheric lighting. These are probably the most popular sort of garden lights out there. They're a very simple 12 volt, which is what we're going to be installing. Easy to put together and, of course, very versatile because they just get spiked in front of a featured tree or perhaps a row of plants. Next we have a step light. We've got two different forms here. One you can actually stick on the outside of a step, obviously, or even a side wall, but this one will need to be countersunk, so there's a little bit more work involved. Both are great for shining down to show where you need to go. And here we have a multi-directional wall light, which obviously shines light in both directions. Mounted onto a wall, it's great for highlighting architecture of your home or perhaps even shining down onto a potted plant. And of course you have your larger bollard lights, which are great for lighting up a driveway perhaps, or even the entrance to a garden. Now that I've shown you what a great range of lighting there is out there, next I'll show you how to install them in the garden.
This is inner city living at its best. This side is paradise. It's paved, perfectly functional backyard. We're in the inner city, Balmain. We've got two families living next to each other. One generation on this side and the other generation on this side. You can tell which ones they are. Dogs and kids have made this place an absolute shambles. The only solution is to pave, but I am super scared of paving. So meet Jonathan, master paver. Jonathan, can you help me?
Maybe.
Now, one thing I do know about paving, it's 99% preparation, and that starts with a good clean out. Okay, this is pretty much cleaned up. Now, I reckon we're lucky. Look at this sub base. It's flat and it's hard.
It's great. Most people would just have dirt at this stage, but we're lucky we've got an existing sub base which we're going to use. If you don't have an existing sub base, it's always a good idea to put 50 to 75 mil of compacted road base under your paving, which usually means digging out a bit more.
Okay, so we've got to get the levels right now.
We do.
Because we don't want the paving coming in and draining water into the house.
No, we don't at all.
We want it draining the other way.
Exactly.
Rocket. So what Jonathan's doing is just using a bit of common sense. We're just using a string line from one side to the other, and that string line will meet our paving.
And we know with the bubble we've got adequate fall going this way.
Once you've got your rough levels right with the rake, then it's important to get the rails down. Now, this looks pretty tricky. Jonathan's screeding back the crusher dust. Have you got any tips for us?
I have. Keep the crusher dust moist. Always better when it's moist.
Just with the hose?
Just with a hose sprinkle. Don't soak it. You'll be in trouble if you soak it. But do prepare your levels. It's easier to spend more time in preparation and less time laying the paving. Otherwise, if you get your levels wrong at the beginning, you'll be in a lot of trouble.
Really is a sandstone city. In fact, they call it the Golden City for great reason. Look at these colours. And sandstone's just so tactile. But I didn't know it came in so many colours. Pink, brown, orange and cream. This is the one that I've chosen. It's called Piles Creek Cream, and it's smooth, a little bit awkward, a little bit heavy. In fact, I don't think Jonathan will be very impressed.
This is the surface of the paver. This is the one that's going to be face up.
Yep.
I need you just to run over the edges like this with the sandstone. Be very careful on the corner.
down. What does
and then
that
do
do?
the bottom edge. It enhances the shadow line on the paving.
Oh.
Looks beautiful. And also, it protects it from chipping.
Now the trick here is, when you're laying pavers, to lay them down flat and don't dig in one corner. So when you jump onto the paver, make sure you step into the middle of it and gently lower them into place. The last step is just to brush a little bit of this Sydney sand into the cracks because we don't want them chipping and we want to stabilise those pavers. But it's a bit wet, so I'm just going to let it dry overnight. Night has fallen and Jonathan's still working. Let's get to it. Eventually, Jono and I did get the job done, and what a transformation. The cost of materials came in about $6,000, but 5 of that was for the sandstone pavers. And I'd like to say it's a one-day job really, but allow 2 and invite some strong friends over.
Now it's my turn this week in the Angels Veggie Patch, and you know, the thing I love about vegetable gardening is that the plants just tend to grow before your eyes. Now our root crops, so that's things like our carrots and our beetroots and all our leafy greens, they're almost ready to be harvested, and even our snow peas are just starting to climb up our wigwam. Things are looking fantastic, but I want to keep them looking good, and that means keeping those bugs away. Now you can see our tomatoes are coming along really nicely, but tomatoes can tend to be a little susceptible to pest and disease. So to keep these babies looking healthy, we're going to control pests the natural way. I'm just going to use some of these sticky yellow traps, which are a little bit like double-sided tape. So you simply remove that cover and you hang it above the plants. And that bright yellow colour is attractive to flying insects, so things like your thrip and your whitefly. And of course, those pests tend to not only attack our crops, but they can also transfer disease, which we don't want. In a couple of weeks' time, this little trap will be covered in sticky insects. Now, this whole area is looking really great, but I think it's time to add a bit of Melissa flair to this part of the garden and get stuck into planting some of my favourite varieties. You know, sweet corn has to be one of my all-time favourite vegetables, but it is a warm season crop, and that means that you need to get your seedlings in the ground after the risk of frost has passed, so you get a wonderful crop ripening around summer and autumn. Now, the one thing to remember about your sweet corn is that it's actually wind pollinated. It helps to actually plant your sweet corn in blocks because the plants rely on the wind to transfer pollen from one plant to the other. Because it doesn't have a dense canopy, you can actually make the most of your ground space by planting things like squash or even leafy greens underneath. They can also help to suppress the weeds. Another really versatile vegetable that's great to cook with are, of course, pumpkins, and they're one of the easiest plants to get in the ground from seed. So I'm going to plant some butternut pumpkins, which have that sweet, nutty flavour. They've also got a really big seed, which means that they're really easy to direct sow. Just make sure that you prepare your beds well first. So what I've done is I'm just raking this soil over and making sure I remove any large clods of soil, because we want to create a nice fine surface. What that fine surface does is pave the way for strong, straight seedlings. Now, when it comes to seed sowing depth, it really depends on the type of seed. If you've got fine seeds, you would really just sow them just below the surface. But when it comes to bigger seeds like pumpkins, you can actually push them in to about the depth of your first knuckle, then just gently cover them with soil. Even the birds are loving this garden. had a love affair with sunflowers since I was a little girl. They always look to me like they've just stepped out of the pages of a children's storybook with these big, sunny, smiling faces and towering stems. Now, these are from the florist and they're a little bit small for my liking, so I'm going to get some giant Russians or giant single sunflowers in the ground. Now, just my vision is to have a few on this side and a few on the other side of the gazebo so we get this lovely framed entrance. I'm feeling much better now that I've added my own flair to the Angel's veggie patch. Now I can't wait to see the results.
How many of us have got this problem? A boring wall and no money. You know, this is the back of the garden shed. It's visually part of the garden, but we've just forgotten about it. I've got some great ideas. I think a big picture frame full of living plants, and then my chair where I can have some coffee, and I think it's going to look really great in part of the garden. This is recycling at its best, Cymbidium. It's basically a dump, but it's amazing what you find. I love when a plan comes together, Matt. That looks cool. And this post photo there, it's all coming together quite nicely. All I need now to do is get Matt to help me just levitate it onto the wall. You right with that?
Ready to go?
And I'll show you some plants that we're going to use to fill up these little planting beds. I'd like it to hear.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yep.
Now these are the plants I've chosen. They're called bromeliads and they come in every colour of the rainbow, and they come in all different sizes as well, from these tiny little tillandsias that are called air plants to the bigger guzmanias and neoregelias, which are lovely, can't kill them, to these terrific ones here, this guzmania with this wonderful flower spike. Now the biggest of them all is called Alcantara, and it's from Brazil. It's huge, and that's my feature plant for the pot that we found at Cymbidium. So all I need now is an old basket liner, and that'll keep the soil in. They don't need much soil to grow. In fact, all they need is a little bit of friable pine bark. Now, in the wild, these plants hold moisture and they live on the cliffs in Brazil. They can actually hold up to 60 litres of water deep in the well, and that's where the little frogs like to hang out. They certainly do in my garden. They've got these wonderful root system, and that's just to give it anchorage. Now, I want to show you something down here. This is really special. Bromeliads don't propagate by seed, they propagate by pups. And here's some brand new plants. I'll just leave them there and I won't take them off till they grow about 15 centimetres. Brand new plants for nothing, I love it. Oh, gorgeous. And isn't it looking great? I love the colours, I love its rustic kind of old Australian feel. Just fill up the garden bed with some potting soil, remembering they don't have huge root systems. And aren't the colours lovely? They really go with the muted colour of the backboard. Now a little bit of maroni red in the corner, and then this lovely pinky green in the middle. Fantastic. The easiest way to attach small bromeliads is to, you wouldn't believe it, but to use a hot glue gun. Now they don't feel a thing, trust me. You just need to run the glue gun down the side and then just stick it on. These two friendly characters will finish off our bush scene. We've got the bull ant and the monitor lizard. Looks fantastic. Bromeliads love tropical climates, but they also grow in subtropical and even cool zones. So log on to our website to see which brom grows best in your area.
Well, earlier I showed you what lights there are on the market. Now we get to the fun part, the installation. Now I've got a 12-volt light from the Sentinel range, really chic stainless steel number, and it's a spike spot. There's a few of these to go in, so I better get started. Step one is to get yourself a bit of a mud map of your garden, or if you're lucky enough to get the original landscape plans, but I'll talk you through these a bit later. Step 2. If you're going to install lights yourself, always use low voltage lights. If you don't have an outside power point, you will need an electrician to install one so you can plug in the transformer. Now, I'd be the first to admit I'm not an expert when it comes to lighting, so I've got Dan from Les Jardins Lumière to make sure I do it correctly. Step 3. Lay your wires around the garden. If you have a lot of lights, you should run 2 wires to avoid voltage drop, which simply means the last light being dimmer than the first. Step 4. Place your lights around the garden in the positions you selected earlier on your plan. Step 5. Connect the lights to the wires. It's simple. All you need to do is strip the wires back, then join the 2 wires from your light fitting to the separate wires from the power cable you have laid in the garden. Put on and shrink heat a gel cap, which will make everything water and dirt proof. So now back to your plan. A general rule of thumb when lighting the garden is to have your brighter lights in the border or perimeter of the garden. In this case, we're highlighting those magnificent strelitzias or bird of paradise. Then getting dimmer closer to the viewing point, in this case the house. Also remember to highlight feature plants or architecture like we have here with our magnificent feature cycad. Well, doesn't this look fantastic? An unusable space at night has now become an oasis, and I'm sure the family's going to be out here entertaining for many nights to come. We used a total of 17 lights in our backyard, which cost around $1,600. But the beauty of doing it this way is you can always install one section at a time, depending on your budget.
After a hard day's work in the garden, relaxing is definitely on the cards. Now, it's been a jam-packed show, so if you've missed anything, don't forget to log on to the Angels website. Oh, and tune in next week because I'm going to show you some of the hottest new release plants.
And I get started on sprucing up our gazebo with some really easy-to-do hanging pots.
I'm going on a big adventure to find the best garden art in Australia. So we'll see you next week.
On Garden Angels!